because how you doing?
Mr. Mattern, I don't know if you know, but my grandfather, great-grandfather was Connie Mack.
Really? I did not know that.
I knew that.
Wow. Well, you'd better know that since she was in your baseball lit class. That's amazing. That's awesome. That's exciting.
Yeah. And now I have his the medal that the city gave him in my house now. So
Wow.
Very cool. Wow. I mean, he's a major piece of baseball history. I mean, but had some pretty phenomenal teams too.
A real gentleman.
Oh.
Much like Kendall.
Unlike you, Doc.
I just fed you that, buddy.
Yes, you did. No stinking Mets fan can be called a gentleman.
I take that on with glee.
Quinn, I have a quick question for you. Isn't your grandfather's crypt when you first go into a Holy Sepulchre Cemetery? Is that his crypt? There's a big crypt that says Mac on it.
that's a good question. I'm actually not 100% sure.
Well, you better find that out.
I know. Well, and I don't know who I'm going to ask now. Sadly, my father just passed away this past November. So find somebody else in the family that can start passing all of that down.
Actually, I would bet a Google search of where Connie Mack was buried will find it.
Yeah.
What are you drinking there, Doc?
I'm drinking a vodka tonic, which might need a refill. And so if you see me escape at any time, especially when you're, nattering on about the history of baseball, you'll know where I am.
He is in Holy Sepulchre Cemetery, Quinn. So I believe it's the one right down the main driveway as you first come in. There's a big thing that says Mac on the top of it. I'm 90% sure that that's it.
Okay, nice. Yeah, sadly, our family didn't really stick together. So no one else, really got buried there.
Quinn, what's your background there?
Oh, that's actually Ryder, where I work.
Okay.
Apparently, it looks completely different now.
I actually spent a couple of summers at Ryder grading the AP exams.
That's
Oh,
Doc.
nice.
The dorms absolutely were appalling where we had to
One
stay.
class on Just Mercy with him.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to get this big.
I've done one of them so far.
Bigger's fine. And, he's talking about things and I'm on mute, right? No.
No, you're not on mute.
Okay, never mind.
We can hear you.
Hey, Jenny Allison.
She's on mute, I bet.
I know. It's all right. I mean, she's heard me talk enough.
There we go. There we got it.
Oh, they're shooting hot.
Hello, Searles.
Hello.
How you
Good
doing?
to see you.
Claire Levin, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Not bad. Not bad. And there's Mr. Hillink is there. It looks like he might have the Phillies hat on. Yeah, he does.
But he supports a good team.
That's right. They're playing now.
Yeah, I know. I could cover up because I have a background. I could put the Phillies on and you wouldn't know.
That's okay.
I will check the scores when Peter's doing his poems.
There you go.
Oh.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Jenny. Hi, John. Hi, guys. How are you? Good.
Hoffman is there. This is good.
How's it going?
Hey.
Hi, Jen.
And I'm
Hey,
finally
long time no
retired
see, Jenny. Hey, good.
Hi, Jenny.
Long time no see.
Heather, should we begin?
Sounds good. Happy Cinco de Mayo, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. Glad to see you all back. We are recording, so we will be, I'll be sharing the video when we're all done. But I think, Kendall, you're kicking everything off again?
I am. I don't know if Robin has signed in yet.
I'm here if anybody can hear me.
Hey, we can hear
Oh,
you.
yeah. Hi,
Good.
Rob.
All right.
Glad we can hear you tonight. So Yeah, we have a special participant that I wasn't aware of until today. And so I thought that it was only appropriate that we give a shout out to his father. Robin Roberts Jr. is with us tonight. And of course, Robin, any self-respecting Phillies fan knows the name Robin Roberts. Any self-respecting baseball fan knows Robin Roberts.
Indeed.
He was an amazing warhorse of a baseball pitcher. Pitched for his career 48 to 66. Pitched for the Phillies from 48 to 1961. Pitched 28 victories in 1952, which led the league. In 53, he led the league with 198 strikeouts, 7-time All-Star, pitched 330 plus innings 6 times. Huh.
No, my God.
There might be 5 pitchers today who make 200 these days. That's a bit of exaggeration. Still, in his 19-season career, I just picked out a few. I could have filled this whole slide with his stats, but these stood out to me.
You made that beautiful slide. I'd like that.
45 shutouts and an ERA of 3.41. I mean, awesome guy, great guy. He actually coached at GA for a little while. I know.
Yeah, I think 4 years.
4 years, was it? Okay.
Wow.
And I taught Robin Jr.'s son, Chris, and was his form head. He graduated in 97, I believe. So.
Yep, 97.
So welcome, Robert and Raman, and I'm glad we could give a shout out to your dad.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome player. So.
Thank you.
I just want to remind anybody, and I'm not speaking to you, Robin, that because if you want to step in, I know you had some comments from the email I saw, and we'd like to hear those comments again tonight at some point when you think it's appropriate. But until we get into the poetry discussions and question and answer, we'd appreciate if you muted so we don't hear the dogs barking and the Dorito crunching, etc. So let us begin. Okay, I got a freeze here. What's going on? There we go. Whew. So tonight we're going to be talking about the Negro Leagues. And also sometimes this era is known as Jim Crow baseball, spanning approximately 1876 to 1945. So yours truly, the history teacher, will give you some background into all this. And before we really get into the aspects of baseball, we need to grasp and understand the context in which the Negro Leagues will be formed. Following the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. Of course, there were the passage of what is called the Civil War Amendments 13, 14, and 15. And these would free the slaves, end slavery, create citizenship for the former slaves, and provide them with the right to vote. This was a huge turning point for the African-American population, as well as the political parties, both Democrats and Republicans, for different reasons. The Democrats had controlled the South for a very long time, approximately beginning with Andrew Jackson's election back in 1828. And Republicans were beginning to be elected in the South after 1865 because of the emancipation and the black suffrage vote. This was great for Republicans, bad for the Democrats. And that's going to be the key political background to the politics of the post-Civil War period up to 1876. As more and more African Americans voted, Democrats began to lose seats in the state legislatures and even a few in the House of Representatives and one Senate seat. And that was unacceptable to the Democrats, particularly of the South, who absolutely were white supremacists and racists. Guess that's the same thing. In 1876, in the presidential election, there was a divided vote. There was cheating going on actually on both parties in 3 states. And as a result, there was no clear-cut winner in the Electoral College, which we all know after 2020 that Electoral College is something we now pay attention to more than maybe we had in the past, although we need to. And so there was a commission established in Congress to discuss and determine the outcome of the election, since the House of Representatives itself could not determine a victor. A deal was cut after a year, and the deal was that the Republicans got to keep the White House with Rutherford B. Hayes, but the Democrats were able to take back the South because the occupation troops of the Union Army were withdrawn, so there was no power to protect African Americans from various white supremacist groups from intimidating and preventing the black vote. So 1876 is really the turning point. And after all that great immediate victory of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, after 1876, the South will gradually return to a segregationist society, and the African Americans are going to lose their political clout, their economic clout, which was beginning, and in some ways they'll be back into slavery. What the Democrats did in the South was to create a deferential population. And so they would intimidate African Americans and either force them to vote Democrat or just prevent them from voting, period. And of course, as I had mentioned before, all the secret societies that were formed to intimidate, to take actions as a terrorist group, and to put the African American, quote unquote, back in their place. And this will evolve from 1876 for a very long time, one can argue, all the way into the 1960s. Another significant turning point was the Supreme Court decision in 1896, 20 years after the election of 1876, Plessy versus Ferguson, where segregation is institutionalized and made formally legal, with the famous phrase, separate but equal. So allegedly, segregation was okay to keep the races apart as long as they were equal. And of course, as we all know, though races were kept apart, equality was not in the offing for that. And these are the justices who made that decision.
Kendall, who's the little guy with his foot on the stool?
I can't tell you. I don't know. I'd have to look at my cheat sheet, which I don't have in front of me. So, sorry.
Thank you.
And so white supremacy will expand even further once the court case is rendered. 1920s saw a massive resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan in particular. Here's a photograph of a Klan march. I think it's interesting to note why I put this one in rather than a more famous one where the Capitol building is behind it, is because of the banner, America First. Mm-hmm. That's all I'll say about that. Mm-hmm. And lynchings reached an all-time high in the 1920s. And as close as Pottstown, Pennsylvania, if you drive there, do a search on Google first, you'll see that there are actually 2 historic markers for to recognize a lynching that took place outside of Pottstown. There was a huge rue. I was still living in Pennsylvania at the time. In fact, it was like the 1990s, I think, when they started arguing over whether or not it was okay to put up historical markers recognizing such a thing. They're there. You can find them online. And so I say that to point out that this isn't just a Southern problem. I mean, white supremacy is something that lived well in Boston, Massachusetts. And so it's not just a Southern problem, although we always focus on the South. And, you know, it just becomes day to day. I mean, I was born in 1950, and my family drove us kids, Mattern kids, down to Florida before 95. So we were on Route 1 for much of the trip from central Pennsylvania down to Florida. And I remember at one point Dad pulling over on the side of the road and got me out of the car, and well, actually all three of us kids out of the car, and pointed up at this huge billboard that as we were crossing into North Carolina, and it said, "Welcome to Klan country," and had a Klan member all suited up on a horse holding a flaming cross. If you go online, you can, I didn't put it in, I probably should have, but Dad pointed that out to me, and that was probably 1956. And I remember, you know, all the signs with colored drinking fountains and white bathrooms and all that. Even Williamsburg, we took several trips there when I was a kid. It was very apparent in the 50s and 60s, even to me, a dumb kid, that you know, something was going on here. So segregation is affecting baseball game. Both amateur and professional baseball were generally segregated, as were most American institutions and pastimes. By the 1860s, Black amateur teams were playing against each other. Even though it's not the Negro Leagues, it really, you know, it's the forerunner to it all. All Black professional teams began in the 1880s. Two of the examples being the St. Louis Black Stockings and the New York Cuban Giants. Arguably one of the first most famous Black baseball players was Moses Fleetwood Walker. He's pictured here in the upper right-hand corner. And he did play with an all-white team except for himself. There were very few like him. He was a catcher for the Toledo Blue Stockings of the American Association, which is the forerunner to one of the major leagues. Some players and teams protested and refused to play against teams with Black players, such as Walker. That was not uncommon. In 1887, the International League club owners voted 6-4 to ban teams that offered future contracts to Black players. Henceforth, an unwritten gentleman's agreement among major league and minor league owners kept Black players off their teams. So really from 1887 on, it becomes almost impossible for an African-American to play on an integrated team. A Georgia law was passed. It shall be unlawful for any amateur white baseball team to play baseball on any vacant lot or baseball diamond within 2 blocks of a playground devoted to the Negro race. And it shall be unlawful for any amateur colored baseball team to play baseball in any vacant lot or baseball diamond within 2 blocks of any playground devoted to the white race. I mean, this is a crazy stringent law. In amateur baseball, some athletes played on integrated college teams and on military teams. Professional Black players were mostly limited to playing in exhibition games on colored teams or traveling a circuit known as barnstorming. And Black and white professional players often competed against each other during off-season games held in Cuba, where baseball was not segregated. And there were a couple clever, if you want to call them, managers who identified an African-American player as an American Indian and try to get it by that way, but that didn't really fly either. This is the thing, you know, I always want to learn something. And for preparation for this, I learned this. And I just, this amazed me. I thought this was really cool, this photograph. So the Spanish-American War. And it starts in part because of a battleship that was, a gunboat really, that was down in Havana Harbor in Cuba. And it blows up. And of course, the warmongers decided that that was good enough reason to go to war against the Spanish. So the USS Maine had a baseball team. And in 1898, February 15, is when the explosion happens. But they had a baseball team in 1898, and it was integrated. There is an African-American, William Lambert, who was a pitcher for the team. So there were exceptions to the rule, but not too many. And all the members you see here, but one were killed in the explosion. But I thought that was pretty interesting. It was, segregation was all completely formalized by these two men. Van Johnson, top left, was the American League commissioner. And as you can read from his quote, "We want no makeshift club calling themselves athletics to go to Cuba to be beat by colored teams." So he was saying you couldn't even go to Cuba for some barnstorming or off-season games, which players would use because they weren't paid much to, you know, make some more money. But they couldn't do it. They couldn't barnstorm against colored teams or integrated teams. And then the final nail in the coffin was because this gentleman bottom left, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who was the baseball commissioner from 20 to 44, put in place essentially because of the Black Sox scandal. And he vetoed attempts by major league teams to sign black players. And he outlawed the Major League Baseball teams from playing in barnstorming games against black teams. So, but now the wall of separation is complete. And as a result, the Negro Leagues were formed. And one of the gentlemen who was central in crafting the Negro Leagues was the man on the left, Andrew Rube Foster, who helped organize the National Negro League that lasted, well, he was head from 1920 to 1930 when he passed away. One can argue that the Negro Leagues lasted from 1920 to 1948. Once Jackie Robinson blows a hole in the color barrier, the Negro Leagues are not long for the world after that. But they do thrive for a period of time, and there's some great books on the history of the Negro Leagues that I will recommend in our final session when I give out a list of books to read. So Rube Foster was pitcher, manager, and owner of the Chicago American Giants throughout that whole time. He stopped really pitching much. He was a good pitcher, but he stopped pitching much by about 1924, and then was just manager. For a while, he pitched and managed. According to the Hall of Fame, approximately 3,400 active players played in the Negro Leagues between 1930 and 1920, excuse me, and 1948. Picking out two of the famous Pennsylvania Negro League teams, Pittsburgh Crawfords and the Philadelphia Stars. But there were other Pennsylvania teams. One of the challenges of looking at the Negro Leagues and the players and determining career stats and all is that there's a lot of teams, and they come and go, some for a very short period of time. Records aren't perfectly kept. Barnstorming may be included in some of those stats. And so it's an interesting thing to contemplate, because I gave you a link to Tyler Kepner's wonderful piece written last year on the Hall of Fame's decision to include the Negro Leagues into the major leagues for statistical purposes. And there's a broad spectrum of opinion about this, setting aside the whole race question, forget those idiots. But, you know, what do you do with the stats, and, you know, how does it affect some of the other great white players, you know, Babe Ruth being one of them. Well, everybody takes their own sides on this, but you can go on YouTube and find all kinds of interesting programs, full programs, like half hour long, of different aficionados discussing the pros and cons of Hall of Fame's decision. I'm just pointing out two of the most famous, great ones here. Josh Gibson played from 1930 to 1946, lifetime batting average of 359, twice hit over 400, hit close to 800 home runs during his 17-year career. Arguably, they think he's hit the longest ball out of Yankee Stadium of any player ever playing baseball. Some consider Gibson to have been the greatest hitter of all time. He signed a contract to play with the Pirates in '43, but of course, Commissioner Landis prevented that from taking place. He was a phenomenal player, a beast of a guy, great arm, is a great catcher behind the plate, and of course his amazing hitting prowess. And of course he would make the Hall of Fame, as he rightly belongs. You know, you can look at his 800 home runs, which of course is far more than any other National League professional Major League Baseball player. And some people say it's a legit 800, and, you know, there are those who say, yeah, maybe not. Wonderful quote from Satchel Paige, who's the other gentleman I'll briefly mention here. He said of Gibson, "You look for his weakness, and while you're looking for it, he's liable to hit 45 home runs." That's paying a lot of respect from a very great pitcher. So, Leroy Satchel Paige pitched from 1926 to 1947, long career. Pitched against major league players and off-season barnstorming teams. In-town tours across the United States, Paige would sometimes have his infielder sit down behind him, and then he routinely would strike out the side. At age 42 in 1948, Paige made his major league debut with the Cleveland Indians. So, but that's after Landis was gone, and that's why it could take place. He was old by athletic standards by then. Considered by many to be the greatest pitcher ever. Quite a character. Again, online, if I'd had time, there's a couple great clips, which I strongly recommend. Ken Burns, they have them clips, not the full thing, on YouTube, and you can see him talking, and he's quite an interesting interview. Colorful man. And I remember him as, you know, growing up, seeing him on live TV. So, Satchel Paige. So that brings us to the end of an introduction to the Negro Leagues. We'll address more of that next week in the final years of the Negro Leagues, and then the breaking of the color line with Jackie Robinson and Henry Aaron, who will be the two men we focus on next week. So at this point, Doc, I turn it over to you. I actually didn't go over my time limit, I'm pleased to see. So
Thank you, sir, and it was brilliant.
Let me interrupt real quick. Do you want a question, Kendall, or do you want to save everything until the end?
It doesn't matter to me. So go, if there's questions, sure. But if maybe we should, but I hesitate only because I don't want to cut into Doc's poem time.
All right.
Because we'll have time. We'll have time at the end.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Unless he goes on and on.
Which is, you know.
I mean, you are a Mets fan. That's all I'll say.
I understand that. I understand that you're a Phillies fan, and we
hey, Doc, before we start the poems.
Yes,
Doc,
I just gave you the lead in there, buddy.
So who's in first place right now?
I believe the Phillies are in by maybe a half game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because their brilliant play has catapulted them above my Mets into such a degree. I mean, we're looking at a game or a half game. So congratulations.
Thank you. And by the way, I think the Mets fired 2 of their coaches, Chili Davis included, and Tyler actually wrote a piece, very interesting piece, yesterday in the Times. I highly recommend that you go and read that after this session.
Yes, and apparently this is completely uncertain, but I suspect that's what happened is that the Mets players, responding to their pitiful batting, invented a batting guru named Donnie Stevenson, who I don't think exists.
He does not.
And therefore, that it certainly didn't help the batting coach and the assistant batting coach hold on to their jobs. Not that they were doing a sparkling job.
Take it away, Doc.
All righty. So why don't we start with To Satch, the poem by Samuel Allen. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background of all of the poets. He became a poet really because he met Richard Wright in Paris, and
who was Richard Wright, Peter?
The great American novelist. Yeah, and became involved with Wright's publication, which was the Présence Africana. It's in 1949. Before that, he had actually studied with the African-American poet James Weldon Johnson, who was a major figure in the Harlem Renaissance. And a fun fact is that Allen's grandmother was a poet and the secretary to Booker T. Washington. So anyway, Samuel Allen graduated from Fisk University and Harvard Law. He wrote under the pseudonym of Paul Vesey while in the years that he practiced law. Didn't want a sort of conflict of interest. In fact, he was a law professor at Texas Southern, served in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. They left the law to teach at Tuskegee University and later at BU. He's also well known as a translator of Jean-Paul Sartre and other French writers. So he also loved baseball, and this is a wonderful tribute to Satchel Paige. Sometimes I feel I will never stop, just go on forever, till one fine morning I'm gonna reach up and grant me a handful of stars, swing out my long lean leg and whip 3 hot strikes burning down the heavens and look over God and say, how about that? I think that's a poem that pretty much speaks for itself. If anybody would like to comment, but I think it shows a lot about what I've read about Satchel Paige, great spirit and a real sense of his own talents. Any questions or comments?
I met Satchel Paige with my dad, and he had said, my dad went up to him and told him he had got a base hit against them when they were barnstorming against the Satchel Paige All-Stars back in '48. And this was when he was elected to the Hall of Fame. And Satchel Paige says, Roberts, he said, I got a little black book home with all the good hitters I ever pitched to. He said, and you ain't in it. That's,
Oh, what a great
better about
story.
Dave.
Wonderful story. Oh my God, thank you. Oh my God. Any other comments or questions? I mean, what do you make of those last three lines? Whip 3 hot strikes, burning down the heavens. And
I was gonna start a little bit before that, Doc, and just the reminding me of the Greek gods, you know, throwing the stars.
Yes.
It's such a beautiful, striking image. And I think a lot of these athletes were so much bigger than life. They were idolized in a way, like gods, by their fans. But that imagery of just grabbing a handful of stars is beautiful. That really, and then of course, as it follows through with throwing them over the plate.
What happens after he whips the 3 hot strikes that burn down the heavens?
So, Doc.
Yes, sir.
I think there's an ironic commentary in those last 3 lines.
Mm-hmm.
The words whip,
mm-hmm.
strike, and burn
mm-hmm.
are very loaded words in African American literature, taking us back to slavery days. And I know he's talking superficially about baseball, but I think there's an element of, right, look at Satchel Paige, right, who dominates his field. And he's, right, looking over at God now and saying, how about that? Like, we can whip and strike and burn with the best of them.
Excellent, David. You're getting a table slap.
Lovely.
All
maybe my first in history.
Well, I mean, you know, your son's got them, but you know, it means something special to me to give it to the dad.
All right.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's an excellent point. And you know, it goes, you know, it's certainly a celebration of Satchel Paige, but it goes beyond that. That's excellent. Excellent. Other comments about that poem? Okay, so
before you move on, Doc,
go ahead. Just
as a history major, I also wanted to wanted to call back to Mr. Mattern's Satchel Paige history. So he not only went to the MLB in his 40s, he had an ERA at 2.5 or 3, and this is after throwing ungodly, number of innings in the Negro Leagues, and ERAs were lower then, but they were around 3.5 or 4, and he was still near dominant at age 41, 42, 43. I remember reading that when I first learned about Satchel Paige and was blown away by his dominance in the major leagues at that age.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to what this happens to be one of my favorite poems, period. And even though it's not a poem that's obviously only about baseball, and that is the poem For My Father by Quincy Troupe. He's an interesting character. Let me tell you something about him. He's still alive, and he's living in New York City. He has been a poet, editor, journalist, former professor of creative writing at University of California, San Diego. He wrote a very well-respected biography of Miles Davis. His father played catcher in the Negro Leagues, and he also played in Mexico. So he added an E to the family name while playing there to accommodate the Spanish pronunciation, so it would be Troupe. While serving in the army in France, after he had dropped out of Grambling University, where he was on a basketball scholarship, he met Jean-Paul Sartre, who suggested that, hey, you ought to try writing poetry. So he did. He associated with poets and the Black Power and Black arts movements, was friends with Amiri Baraka, or Leroy Jones, Nikki Giovanni, Ishmael Reed, and James Baldwin. After teaching at San Diego for 22 years, he was appointed the poet laureate of California, but a background check revealed that he had never graduated from Grambling. So he resigned from the laureateship and professorship in 2003. So an early woke moment, to be sure. So what I would like to do is, the pedagogy says that what we're going to do is an interrupted reading. And old farts like me say, well, we're going to do this stanza by stanza. Okay. So I wanted to ask you first, though, are there any particular questions? I mean, like either factual questions that that you have about any of the content of the poem? We're not talking about meaning. We're just talking about, like, you know, facts. Okay. So, by the way, this is a poem that is like full. I mean, it has similes galore. So let's try the first stanza and then I'll stop and we'll talk about it. Poem for my father. Father, it was an honor to be there in the dugout with you. The glory of great black men swinging their lives as bats at tiny white balls burning in at unbelievable speeds, riding up and in and out, a curve breaking down wicked, like a ball falling off a table, moving away, snaking down, screwing its stitched magic into Chitlin circuit air. Its comma seams spinning again toward breakdown, dipping like a hipster, bebopping a knee-dip stride in the Charlie Parker 40s, wrist curling like a swan's neck behind a slick black back, cupping an invisible ball of dreams. So, yeah, this is about a baseball player. It's a tribute to his dad. How does this, just the beginning of the poem, go beyond that? And remember, just spit out your ideas. Or how does...
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. The one thing that jumped out at me as a lover of jazz is that the line about jazz in Charlie Parker actually takes on a bit of a syncopated rhythm. And so the delivery sort of mirrors bebop jazz itself. And so I thought that was really interesting.
That's really good. Yeah, very good. Okay.
I thought that the all the description of the pitches is sort of like how life comes at, you know, the African-American players. You know, it goes every direction. It's in, it's out, it's up. They never know what to expect or what's coming at them. So it's sort of maybe a, you know, a metaphor for what their life is like, never knowing what's going to come next.
And yet having the invisible ball of dreams. Right?
Yes.
Always
being hopeful.
Yes, yes. And what do you think he's getting at by saying screwing its stitched magic into Chitlin circuit air? Its commas seem spinning again toward breakdown. What's Chitlin circuit air?
What are you doing?
Well, wouldn't the Chitlin circuit be a reference to the Negro Leagues?
Yeah, exactly. And he gets there by using the word Chitlin. Yeah, excellent. Okay.
Also,
yeah, go.
I was just going to jump in and say, I think there's kind of a foreshadowing of the tone to come later on in the poem when the juxtaposition of like great black men swinging their lives as bats, and then tiny white balls and running in unbelievable speeds, riding up in and out. So there's a kind of those two lines, right, one after the next. I think I almost sense like an anger underneath that I think you see come out later on in the poem, especially in more kind of explicit terms.
Yes, that's really good. And as David Hilling said earlier, notice the word burning. Okay, again, very suggestive, and certainly, yeah, this poem is so much about the African American experience, and it just happens to be about this guy's father as well.
Burning, Doc, you have the curve breaking down wicked, like a ball falling off a table. I think the word screwing is intentionally chosen here. Not only is it stitched magic, obviously making a reference to some of the backgrounds within the cultures that have come to this country. But one of the things that I really appreciated at the end was cupping an invisible ball of dreams, as Ginny pointed out, that invisible hope that everyone was, hoping that there would be some sort of acceptance, not just on the ball field, but in general.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so anything else for the first stanza? We're moving on.
Just one real quick.
Yeah, sure.
The mention of the swan's neck, that strikes me is what kind of swan is he referring to?
The curve of the ball.
Okay, so yeah, the ball is dipping, curling like a swan's neck behind a slick black back. So it seems to me juxtaposed, the ball is curving the same way that a swan's neck curves, but he then juxtaposes the swan with this slick black back, right, which cups an invisible ball of dreams. So I think he's using the image there for the swan's neck to suggest the movement of the ball.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Sometimes the reference to swans can be to the white swan or the
black swan.
The black swan, yeah.
Now, what did you think?
I took it as a black swan.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think so. That's very good, Heather.
Oh, a table slap? Thanks, Doc.
I don't want to start getting promiscuous with these table slaps, but when you're smart, right? And several of you deserve them that I didn't give you. And I'm kind of, with Kurt, I just sort of resist, the table slap, but it's okay. Okay, so here we go to stanza 2. And you there, Father, regal as an African Obeah man, sculpted out of wood from a sacred tree of no name, no place origin, thick branches branching down into Cherokee and someplace else lost, way back in Africa. The sap running dry, crossing from North Carolina into Georgia, inside Grandmother Mary's womb, where your mother had you in the violence of that red soil, ink blotter news gone now into blood graves of American blues, sponging Rococo truth long gone as dinosaurs, the agent oranged landscape of former names, absence of African polysyllables, dry husk consonants there, now in their place, names flat as polluted rivers, and that guitar string smile always sneaking across virulent American redneck faces, searching like atomic heat mushrooming over Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the fevered, blistered shadows of it all inked as etchings into sizzling concrete. That's a hell of a stanza. That's incredible power there. So where is he going in the poem? He sets us up with the father. He sets us up with, African-American players who were searching for the dream. And then he moves to this. Why do you think? And what is he up to?
One of the things he does, Doc, is I find fascinating is he ties the lost African history and the Obeah Man reference, you know, tying to the family history, I'm assuming to Jamaica. And then the loss of name, no place, origin, thick branches branching down into Cherokee and someplace else lost way back in Africa. The sap runs dry. The family history has run dry.
Yes.
And yet he then ties it into everything else within the society going on at the time. References to Agent Orange in Vietnam, references to the atomic bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, you know, talking about how the shadows were, you know, sizzled into the concrete in Hiroshima. I mean, he's really digging deep here to condemn the world that has, you know, punished his family.
Excellent. I'm sorry I have to do this, but you got the table slapped there. Okay. By the way, an Obeah Man, yeah, I looked this up because I figured I didn't know what the hell it was. But anyway, is a voodoo expert and magician who was, you know, a leader with African slaves in the West Indies. So there's another layer brought to it. Other comments or other answers to that sort of general question about where is he going in the poem?
Reaction to the use of the atomic bomb and Agent Orange is just like the obliteration of the history of African Americans when they were dragged out of Africa.
Yeah, very, very good.
I had a thought about talking about their lost heritage from Africa and their history, and then going to war in so many wars and not being recognized and left out of history again.
Wow. It's really good. What about the guitar string smile always snaking across virulent American redneck faces? I've never quite gotten a handle on that, maybe because I don't know any virulent American redneck personally.
I sort of take that as a tight-lipped smile, so maybe a grimace, something that's intimidating and reminiscent of, you know, an aggressive encounter with a racist.
Yeah, I think that you're right on, Beth. Why a guitar string?
Well, my
I don't have the answers to a lot of the questions I'm asking you, but
my reaction is that so much of American music is based upon what came out of the Negro experience.
Okay, keep going.
I think guitar strings are like really tight and also thick and hard. And I think that, you know, image of that tight smile that, you know, they can barely stand to look at them. So they give that really tight, nasty smile. And the strings are like that, tight and hard.
That's good. Was that Ginny?
Yes.
Hey, Ginny.
Hey.
Very good. Okay. Are there any other questions you might have? I mean, I think we've done a nice job with getting at the core of this stanza.
Yeah, actually I do. This might be like a little bit irrelevant, like it was just a small part of the line, but where he says like sponging Rococo, I didn't know what he meant by that, because like I know what Rococo is as an art movement, but I just didn't understand it in that context. Okay, so do you want to explain what Rococo is as an art movement? By the way, I remember after I separated from my ex-wife, I lived in a house in Chestnut Hill, and the landlady was a real loon. She lived actually on the coast of France,
And at one point I told her, you know, the damn toilet is leaking all over the place. Now, of course, I had no handyman, you know, I mean, it's like she's in France. So I'm telling her about this. And she said, well, all right, if you have to replace it, but don't get one of those Rococo toilets. So I would like you to tell us what Rococo is, because I'll be damned if I can ever figure out what a Rococo toilet is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing a master's in art history, but I don't know what a Rococo toilet would be either, to be honest. Because it's like an 18th century art movement. It's kind of after Baroque, but it's like asymmetrical, but it's very extravagant. It's very ornamental. It's similar to Art Nouveau, just in the sense that like it just abandons like sense of symmetry, but it's overly extravagant. Maybe that's what she meant, is to not get like a golden toilet or something.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I don't think any of the places that any of the plumbers I spoke to were going to offer that as a possibility
for you. But yeah, like it's quite similar to Baroque, but just like a bit more erratic. Like mid 18th century sort of.
So and that's really good. Okay, so how does that go with where your mother had you in the violence of that red soil ink blotter news, gone now into blood graves of American blues, sponging Rococo truth, long gone as dinosaurs. That to me is I love those lines, and I'm really sort of baffled by them.
Yeah, I didn't understand that like completely, but maybe it is just more for like imagery. I can't think of.
What is the truth long gone as dinosaurs that's somehow connecting to American blues?
Doc, is it possible that they're making reference to the lost history that they have? And because of the cultural disconnect that they have lost over their transition, everything's gone. And so the only thing that they have left is the American blues. It's something that's—
Yes, okay, very good. That's where I was thinking a little bit. Yeah, excellent. I think that's it. The blues is the heritage, right? The blues and jazz are the heritages that have emerged when all else has been forgotten. Makes sense?
It could also be, exorbitant truths like oral history, that things get built upon, and they're just like Rococo, they're a little out of balance, and you lose that oral history if it isn't carried from generation to generation. So
nice.
They have is the blues and the things that are carried from generation to generation.
Really good. Really good. Okay, so let's go to the next stanza. But you there, Father, through it all, a Yardbird solo riffing on bat and ball glory, breaking down the fabricated myths of white major league legends, of who was better than who, beating them at their own crap games with killer bats, as Bud Powell swung his silence into beauty of a Josh Gibson home run, skittering across piano keys of bleachers, shattering all manufactured legends up there in lights, struck out white knights on the risky edge of amazement, awe, the miraculous truth, sluicing through steeped and disguised in the blues, confluencing, like the point at the cross when a fastball hides itself in a curve, breaking down and away in a wicked sly grin, posed as an ass-scratching Uncle Tom, who, like Satchel Paige delivering his famed hesitation pitch before coming back with a hard, high, fast one, is slicker, sliding quicker than a professional hitman. The deadlines of it all, the sudden strike like that of the brown bombers crossing right of Sugar Ray Robinson's lightning cobra bite. So we've seen where he's taken us in stanza 1 and 2, and now he returns to his father. Why? Why does he now focus here really on the Negro Leagues? Like, how does it make sense in the poem?
I think it's just bitterness coming out, really, on that that he has to sit there and watch them playing in a separate league when they're every bit as good as the players in the other league. And I think it's just a whole stanza of bitterness.
Okay, and where does it go beyond bitterness?
Could it go back to the hope of getting in history, having a history? That the league.
Well, he's giving it a history, isn't he?
Yeah, and
Because
also that it would be recognized by America as part of our history.
Mm-hmm.
The hope comes back.
And of course, you know, when he uses expressions like a yardbird solo, that's another reference to Charlie Parker, right? Why? Why would he use it there? Riffing on bat and ball glory. And he's not talking about Charlie Parker, he's talking about his dad, riffing on bat and ball glory.
Seems like he's recognizing his father's type of success, maybe. Doing it in his own fashion, against the odds or the predisposition towards the white culture. I mean, he's doing it his own way, against the fabricated myths of the white legends, beating them at their own game.
Yeah, I mean, that's where that bitterness is to me, that's where it's strongest, right there, where he's, you know, the fabricated myths of white major league legends. You know,
I think about the White Knights is a reference to the Ku Klux Klan, playing on the risky edge of amazement, awe, truth sluicing through, steeped and disguised in the blues, talking about how the blues made its own history in its own way through music and had to do it on its own and had to do it through its own strength and its own will of a people. The wicked, sly grin, curved and poised as an ass-kicking, ass-scratching Uncle Tom. I mean, the historical reference that he's making here, he's not hiding and pulling any punches as he finishes up with the brown bomber. I mean, he's slamming the America that he knows, and his father is standing up to it all. And it's really an ode to his father's, it seems to me anyway, to be an ode to his father's strength of character and ability.
And their equivalent skill to white players, despite the fact they weren't being recognized.
Yes. Yes.
And oops, where's it go?
Go ahead.
And I think it was really interesting to look at the parallels between the smile with a guitar grin and the wicked sly grin, curved and posed as an ass-scratching Uncle Tom, between the two different stanzas, showing who has which kind of a grin and why. I thought it was very strong to bring the two together and with a different view.
Very good. Yeah. Excellent.
And then using the piano keys of Bleachers, again, talking about the blues music, he's pulling between the two stanzas and pulling you in along as he's trying to create the history and show where the Negroes are right now.
And it's interesting because, you know, there's been this musical motif throughout the poem, and
exactly.
So now he's deciding the piano keys of Bleachers.
And I think of piano keys with the blues immediately. You just think of the speakeasies, or you think of, you know, the dancing that they're doing. And then he just builds on that tremendously in the next stanza. But
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's, I think, when I think of, and I'm not sure he was thinking this, but I think of the strength of the Negro in the music as well as in the baseball.
Yeah. And of course, piano keys are black and white.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the Sugar Ray Robinson at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
boxing.
Yeah. Why does he move there?
It's another chance at getting some history, some good history. The blues, the baseball, and now the boxing.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting. He started with.
Oh, please.
I thought it was interesting. He started with saying being their own crap game. Like he's been talking about great baseball is, but now suddenly it's their own crap game, and how horrible everything there. You know, they're things that are happening that aren't great. They're made up legends that aren't as good as the players in his league. You know, but then it comes back to, you know, get more beautiful as he talks about what they're able to accomplish, like the Brown Bombers crossing, you know, that lightning cobra bite is sort of a really great description, but suddenly it's a crap game because.
And there's also, you know, it's interesting with that, to me, that cobra bite, because cobra bite is lethal.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, from the, the great political perspective of this poem, there's a real kind of ominousness to it. I mean, that might, yeah, go ahead.
And don't you also have a tie between, I think of a cobra coming up and curling its head up. It reminds me of the other stanza where he was talking about the swan's neck curling around the ball. And you could think of a cobra curling up and then coming at you. I think that's an interesting time. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
I had to remind myself that the Brown Bomber was actually Joe Louis. So he's referencing two different boxers in those last two lines.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yep. Very
good. I was wondering if the history of the blues, I don't know a lot about the history of the blues, but is the blues an origination that came from the African American community?
Yeah.
And is boxing come from the African American community, and the baseball was crafted by the whites, and that they had to struggle to participate and get acknowledged in it. Is that true? Am I right about that or not? I don't know if that's true, what I just said.
Well, the blues, definitely. I mean, the blues were born really during the times of slavery.
Okay.
Can't say that about boxing.
What's that?
Can't say that about boxing.
No. Okay.
No. Right. Okay, so let's finish up this poem. And you there, Father, through it all, catching rhythms of kono or hono pozo balls, drumming like conga beats into your catcher's mitt, hard and fast as cool Papa Bell jumping into bed before the lights went out, of the old Negro Baseball League, a promise, a harbinger of shockwaves soon come. What a beautiful way to tie it together. So I'm going to ask you a question, because I didn't know. So I taught the thing about the Honopozo balls. Do you have any idea about what those things are? Okay, because if somebody had looked it up, I would have had like a massive table slap ready for.
I'm in, Doc. Right, I
What's
looked
that?
up. It's Chano Pozo.
Okay.
Who was a Cuban percussionist.
Yes.
Played the conga drums.
He did.
Yeah.
He did. And he was a major role, he played a major role in founding Latin jazz. He co-wrote several compositions with Dizzy Gillespie, and was Dizzy Gillespie's first Latin percussionist. And fun fact, he was a great influence on Desi Arnaz. He was also a devotee of Santeria. And when a kid, he played, the way he started off is he played percussion at African-Cuban religious ceremonies. So the idea of the rhythm and the kind of, almost, I guess, spiritual element of it fits nicely in this poem because there's a lot of spirituality there. He moved to the US, and when he was 33 years old, was shot to death in Harlem by a bookie who he accused of selling low-grade marijuana. So, but how do those last two lines just bring it all together from the beginning? You could take things like, the promise. We've heard about the promise before, haven't we, in stanza 1? The harbinger, it's all there. The shock waves in that very bitter stanza and the one before it. But there are more that are going to come. So to me, it's like a perfect ending to a really hard poem, and I think one of the most powerful poems I've read that in any way concerns baseball. And I probably nattered on too long, haven't I, Kendall?
Not at all.
Okay. So I suppose we should ask for general questions now before I go to, because the other poems would take time, so I can move on to do them next week. Right? Because my watch says it's 8:15.
Yeah. Heather, my screen's frozen. Can you take off my screen sharing, please? Thank you.
There, towards the beginning, Larry Altman, and I haven't looked to see if Larry's still here. Oh, yep, he's still here. Had put a question in the chat. Did the Negro Leagues teams play in front of integrated crowds or segregated crowds? He asked.
Good question. Mostly segregated. There were, white people were welcome to attend. Some did, but it was predominantly a black crowd that attended the Negro League games.
My grandfather used to go a lot to the Negro League games.
Cool.
Yeah. And he lived in Jersey City, and so there were a lot, yeah.
No, there were about 3 Negro
There was a Newark, I think he went to the Newark team.
I have a question about the poem, the last part of that poem.
Yeah.
I was thinking that maybe that the origination of those two, of boxing and of what's the other thing, of the blues, was part of the African American history. But then I was thinking maybe it was that they were not kept out of those arenas, but they were kept out of baseball. Maybe that was the message, was that they were not kept out of boxing. Does anyone know the history of boxing? I don't know that much about boxing, but was there ever a discrimination against black boxers in the history of boxing? Does anyone know?
Yeah, they weren't boxing white boxers in the beginning. They weren't allowed to fight one another. It took a while till they actually met up.
Okay.
Okay.
There's a discrimination there.
You want to look at the story of Jack Johnson.
Right.
All right, that'll give you an idea of the ongoing problems hit black boxers like anybody else of color.
Right, but black boxers fought white boxers long before baseball was integrated.
Biggest one being Max Schmeling, where it was, Adolf Hitler was his golden boy, and the fight that they were having back in 1936, and that's about 15 to 20 years after Jack Johnson, who was one of the best boxers in history.
That was The Great White Hope, right? That film?
Yeah.
Right.
Correct.
Thanks.
Hey, Doc, I wanted to come back to something you said earlier when you were talking about Samuel Allen and Quincy. they both knew Jean-Paul Sartre? Did Sartre write any poems about baseball?
No.
Oh,
No.
can't believe it.
Really, Alan got to know him more, or initially through his talents as a translator. But no, I can't say that Sartre had never done it, but I certainly, and I'm no great expert on Sartre, but I don't believe that he ever. I don't even know if he knew what baseball was.
I think No
Really?
Exit
Yeah.
is about the Phillies bullpen, isn't it?
Very interesting point.
Let's not go there. Well, it's 8:15 your time. Another good session, I think.
Yeah.
Great.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot.
Good poems. Doc, thank you very much.
Well,
Great
thank
history.
you.
Thanks to you both.
What's
for
that?
I said
Participation.
thanks to you both. It was great. The history.
Oh, our pleasure.
Thank
I
you.
speak for myself. I assume it's Kendall's for pleasure as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely. So next week, assuming Tyler's on for the fourth and final session, next week we'll kind of wrap up the history side of things and poetry with the breaking of the color barrier and celebrating Jackie Robinson and Hank Aaron.
And next week is Tuesday, right?
Yes. Yes, and that's because of me. I'm driving to Southern California to see my new grandson, Bash Mattern. So I suspect wrestling and football are in his future, knowing his father. So
So same time next week, 7 o'clock.
Yeah, run on Tuesday instead of Wednesday.
On Tuesday. Okay.
Yep.
Great, thanks.
But then we'll be back on Wednesday for the fourth and final session. So
No, next Wednesday, but the following Wednesday.
that's what I said, Doc.
I didn't hear you use the word following.
Okay, it's time to go now.
All right.
Happy Mother's
Have a
Day,
good week,
everyone.
everybody.
What's the
Bye.
score?
Bye.
Oh, yeah, Philly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come on, everybody.
Thanks.
Here.